Hello, and welcome to the Giants Next Door, where we speak with the leaders shaping Australia's future through deeper engagement with Asia. Here we talk with some of the country's key business figures about their relationship with Asia and hearing their insights and reflections on what it takes to lead, build and succeed in the region. My guest today is Glenn Keys, AO, Executive Chairman and Founder of Aspen Medical. Glenn's career began as an engineer and officer in the Australian Army before moving into the health sector, where he built one of Australia's most successful global healthcare companies. Under his leadership, Aspen Medical has delivered critical projects across Asia, from responding to health crises to building long-term capacity in countries across the region. Glenn brings a blend of operational discipline, entrepreneurial vision, and a deep commitment to social impact, offering valuable insight into how Australian expertise can contribute to a stronger, more resilient partnership with Asia. Glenn, welcome to the Giants Next Door.
Oh, thanks very much, Lee. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Glenn, I want to start with the origin story of Aspen Medical. It's a cracking story. You've shared it with me previously and at programs and events and forums. I've heard it. So help our listeners understand what led you to start and build Aspen Medical.
Oh, thanks very much. Well, my background, if I go back a little further than just the start of Aspen, is I was originally in the military. I was in the Army. I did mechanical engineering, and then I was lucky enough to go to the UK and I did aeronautical engineering, and then I went to test pilot school and did flight test engineering. And I was having a ball in the military. And then my wife and I had our middle child, who has Down syndrome, and we realised we needed to focus on him. So stepped out after the military after 15 years. I'd had a great time and was looking forward to more, but had to focus on the priority, which was family. I then got picked up to start up a startup, and I sort of led that. And one of our first contracts was in Indonesia. And, I had never been to Indonesia, but was up there at an amazing time, had some great experiences, built the company up for the owner. It was then sold to a major US defence company, and I was working with them when I had to do some work in the UK and met up with a very good friend of mine who's a surgeon over there, and came and saw me and said, Tony Blair is going to revolutionise how healthcare is delivered in England, but they're going to really need new and different ways of thinking to come into the country. And he saw an opportunity. And I came back and told a friend of mine who's a doctor, and he said, well, I don't really get anything about government contracts or tendering, but really interested in what the opportunity might be. So I decided to lead in that, particularly having had experience in government and in tendering. So kicked off Aspen Medical in May of 2003. And our first opportunities were in the Solomon Islands and in the UK, targeting that waiting list surgery that friend of ours had spoken about, but also supporting the Australian government in the Ramsay mission, the regional assistance mission to the Solomon Islands. And so really that opportunity of delivering health logistics, health where it's needed most, taking developing world care where it's needed around the world was really exciting, and that's where we started. And now we're in 23 countries around the world and 6,500 staff, and continuing to grow and do the things that have always been important to us, which is have a strong social purpose at our core of how we do our business. But you're still a business, you've still got to deliver a profit, you've still got to benefit shareholders, but you can do it in a way that is responsible and ethical, in a way you feel proud of what you deliver.
Amazing. I have to ask, when you were in Indonesia or other parts of the world and then you find yourself moving into the private sector, starting businesses and these types of things, was there a moment that you thought the international aspect was definitely going to be a part of whatever you built?
Oh, look, I think so. I mean, I think the one thing that Australians do well is they understand what it's like in Australia, but we also realise that we are quite isolated in this area. This is not our neighbourhood. And so subsequently, when Australians go overseas, they have to think about where else they're going and what else they're doing. And when I went to Indonesia, my eyes were opened to what other cultures were like, how other people did business, the opportunities that existed elsewhere. So that early experience in Indonesia certainly set my mind thinking that there was a great thing to export Australian know-how, passion, commitment into other parts of the world, be they our neighbours like Indonesia or the other side of the world.
And in addition to that international experience, the experience working in the military, the leadership lessons that you learn in the military, and that distinctive style that you gain through working in the military environment, was that foundational to building Aspen Medical? And I'm thinking of, solving problems, working under pressure, the logistical aspects.
Look, I credit an enormous amount of my personal success to the training that I had in the military, the other officers and senior NCOs I worked with or who trained me, even my father who'd been in the Air Force, and what I learnt from him and what I saw about how he took that military training and what he did. So the logistics, the health logistics we do, absolutely. I was taught that at every level in the area of the Army I was in. But those leadership skills of respecting everybody that you work with at every level and realising that you want to be treated well, so you need to treat them well, and getting the best out of people, of where their specialties are, what they're good at, what they can do. And, I find that really, really exciting. And I consider myself blessed that I was trained under a very rigorous model on how to use that. And if you have a look across a lot of leaders, a lot of them have had military experience in leadership, in logistics, in planning, but also in problem solving. That every problem has a solution. You may not know it, but the other people you work with may know it, and listening and drawing on those ideas, synthesizing them. That's exciting. I love doing that every day.
Is there an example that comes to mind? Something that you've encountered, a challenge, problem, goal you've encountered in your private sector career that really drew upon your foundational military experience?
It's a really good question. I might actually answer that by talking about how our team have answered problems, because a lot of our staff are ex-military as well. We were engaged by the Australian government to help with the evacuation of several hundred refugees out of Afghanistan during the fall of Kabul. Our team on the ground were ex-military. They got approached and said, can you set up a hospital? And we need a hospital. We identified about 36 staff. This would be a surgery, ward care, clinics, etc. In 72 hours. We knew that we weren't going to get a contract in place. We got an email letter of intent that said they were going to do it. And so our team said, the only way we're going to do this is we need to buy the hospital, ship it over now, start to bring the people across. And it was clear that they were on the ground. They knew what they were doing. They understood they needed to capture their costs along the way, but this was around the outcome. So we gave them full authority to get on and do that. We bought a hospital out of Europe. They had it on a plane, shipped across. We got it through customs in 5 hours instead of 5 weeks. And to do that, they knew they needed to lean on DFAT. They needed to lean on Defence to help us with their connections, bring people across, get passports, get security clearances. 72 hours later, the hospital was up and running. And when the Americans, the Brits and the Canadians heard that the Australian government had committed to setting up a hospital to treat refugees before they flew them back to their country, they asked, could they put their refugees through there? So we treated 4,500 refugees through that facility in that time. And I see the way that worked, the way people pulled together, they knew what had to be done to achieve the outcome, but still ensure that a contract ended up 6 weeks later, meant that we delivered on that task by getting the right things done in the right order, to produce an outcome that was extraordinary, and I think few other people in the world could have done.
A lot of the conversations I've been having with guests are about adapting what you do to local practices, being aware, respectful of culture, but at the same time having to get a goal delivered. Now, you've done that, but it feels like you've institutionalized that in Aspen Medical. So it's not just about Glenn, the individual leader. It from the examples even you've shared in our conversation so far, it feels like you've managed to embed them across your organisation. So walk us through that. What's the secret to success there?
Look, I think you're absolutely right that it is systemic. So everybody in the organisation understands we're a business, we have to make money, but we have a social purpose. So today alone, we had the Aspen Medical Foundation board meeting, and we have staff representatives on that. We called for staff representatives who were flooded with the number of staff who wanted to be represented on that, because they understand how we think. My wife and I own the company, how we think and what that means and how it's important. And so we realized that if we wanted to scale this to be in Indonesia, to be in the Middle East, to be in America, to be in Africa, to be in the Pacific, if you're going to do that, you need to give guidance to people over what are your values, what are the ethical lines we will not step over, but how they focus on an outcome and what is important to do. And so we see that every single day in how the team operates. And, we occasionally get people in the organisation who don't stick to those values. And we had a particular incident in one country and someone had really strayed very far from those values. And I spoke to the manager who ran it and I said, what are we going to do? And he said, right, so we're terminating this individual. We're giving him all of the guidance on why we're terminating him. We have told him that you don't align with our values, and so therefore you cannot work in this company. Nobody came to me to ask me to make that decision. They knew that was the right thing to do. And I think those are hard decisions to make, and yet they're prepared to make them because they know they've got the value set that they've seen operated with every day, that we don't just talk the talk, we walk it as well. And they know that when they make those decisions, we will be there to back them up.
And what does that, how does that land when you go to new markets and different cultures, and you must be introducing the Aspen way, the Aspen Medical way to new partners, clients, stakeholders, customers, these types of suppliers, these types of folk? How does that land in the local context?
Look, we're just very clear with it from the start. I won't say which particular country, but I was in a country in a meeting. We were working with a customer, and we just had this meeting. It's going round and around and around. And the guy who had taken me to the meeting, about 20, 25 minutes into the meeting, went, oh, I'm sorry, I should tell you, Glenn doesn't do bribes. And this guy went, oh, okay, now. And then we got on and finished the meeting, and we achieved the outcome. We have had to, at times, walk away from opportunities because we said we are not going to pay people off. We're not going to make payments. We are going to follow the way that we have told everybody else we will operate. And so that's important to us. And we walked away from business because we could not find a way to make it work unless you had decided that you were going to make payments to people. And we said, we're not going to do that. And everybody knows that's the way we operate. And now people know that when they engage with us, those are the value set we're going to work with. And if that's not how they want to work, they actually self-select. They don't approach us anymore because they know that we're going to operate through the right ethical background.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And I wholeheartedly agree that when you build that reputation, when your reputation for working in an ethical way versus what might be the alternatives, when that reputation precedes you, it's very useful because you don't have to fend with so many approaches or conversations. And there's a lot of grey in these conversations as well. So the more that you stay in the light, to use that end of the spectrum, the more beneficial it is, because it's even just a drain to have to navigate tricky conversations. And of course, they don't always start at the senior level where senior execs might have a clear cut view because it's by inches sometimes. Those great conversations.
I'll tell a story about there was a country we were shipping material into, and everything was held up at the dock, and my guy rang and said, look, it's an emerging country. They don't have any paper for the printer to print our license, so they'd like $50 to buy paper. And I said, you're not giving them $50. Go buy a ream of paper. You know what? Buy the box. Give them the whole box of paper. But you're not giving them money.
Yeah.
And he said, why not? I said, because if 50 is okay, is 100 okay? Is 1,000 okay? I said, where do you stop? Once you've stepped over the line, you can never walk back from that line. So you've got to be clear about what's appropriate and what's not.
So ethical behaviour is a good, clear-cut case of where Australian businesses should be very firm about their value set and the ways of operating for both values, but also for legal reasons. There's a lot of motivators around this. Beyond that, though, thinking about localisation, working with local partners, how would you give it, or what advice would you give to Australian businesses and leaders around how do I stay true to what we do, our products and services, and when do I know how to localise, customise, adapt? How do you figure that out?
So I think, that's really, really interesting because you don't want to be arrogant and say everything I do is perfect, the way I do it is perfect, and you have to accept me all or nothing. And it's no use going to the other end of the arc and saying, we'll adapt every single thing and do nothing, because then you're devaluing your IP. So one of the things you need to do is understand clearly what is that powerful thing you're selling. What is it that you're providing that nobody else has that's unique to you, your intellectual property? Now, once you know that, you can say, right, now I need to put it in a context that this customer will understand. So this bit of me, this bit of my company is still core and it's important and we are true to it, but we are going to engage, if we go into Indonesia or into Cambodia or Vietnam or the Philippines, to suit their culture and their approach and how they deal with things. But we will hold this bit true because that's what we're selling. So, you sell a foreign car overseas, you might change the font to put it into their language. So it's not in English, it might be in Vietnamese or whatever country you go to, but you're still selling your car. You've just changed it so they can read it and understand it. So you've got to know what's core to you, but then you need to be respectful. You need to be respectful of their culture and their ways. How do you sell? How it's going to operate? It's no use telling somebody that they have to operate it the way you use in Australia if that's not how they operate in their country. So you've got to work out how do you tailor your core product to suit them. But you can't ever not understand what it is you're selling. So you must have that as a core value that is your North Star for whatever you're selling.
So that's sage advice. Going a step further, how do you work that out? I mean, where do you gather the information? Where do you make the decisions?
I think we're luckier today than we've ever been in that there are many, many ways to find this out. I'm a big fan of using Austrade. I've found, Australian government pays to put trade representatives around the world. Why wouldn't we use them? Our taxes go to them every day. They're living on the ground. They know people. Use them. Particularly if we're chatting about Southeast Asia, Asia Link has done a fantastic series of books to help you before you don't even have to leave your office, right? Just get the online version or the hard copy and read through and understand the markets. At least look at them and go, I think out of all of these markets, the Philippines is where I should be, or Indonesia, or Malaysia. Where do you need to be to go there? And then you need to invest by traveling up. Right? You need to go to those countries. You need to do lots of meetings. You need to talk to people. And you need to realise that you would not expect someone to fly to Australia, have one meeting with you and make a sale. So you are not going to get away with flying to Indonesia and have one meeting and making a sale. If you do, you're the luckiest salesman ever. But realistically, you're going to need to get up, understand the market, understand the culture, invest time do dinners, do lunches, read, talk to people, ask questions. But unless you invest in that market and understanding it and working out what sells for you and what doesn't, then you can't expect anyone to buy from you if you're not prepared to invest in them.
You've just referenced Indonesia. The project that you've got in Indonesia is proving to be quite an impressive footprint. Can you share with us more about what Aspen Medical's doing in Indonesia?
Sure. So look, we're really excited to be bringing healthcare to all of the people of West Java. We're building the first of 23 hospitals and 650 primary care clinics. Half of those will be mobile. It's an assignment from the Governor of West Java to do that. The hospital's well on the way. Very exciting. I've got a big review meeting of where the design and construction is up to this week. It'll be the first green accredited hospital in Indonesia, which we think is really critical in this time of understanding climate change, being leaner, greener and cleaner. Really, really important. We're bringing the latest of global methodologies of, let's not have large hundreds and hundreds of beds hospitals with a few surgeries. It's more surgeries, more daycare, getting people home, turning them around. People recover better when they're surrounded by family than in a hospital for weeks on end. Dramatic improvement in processes like knee replacements, hip replacements, whole range cancer treatment. So we're looking at how the facility is going to be resilient to future changes in those as we deliver those. We're also, since we've started down this path, been approached by a number of operators of existing hospitals who've got one or two hospitals, maybe a few, and they've realised that they might be very, very good in specific areas, but healthcare, which has a growing demand in Indonesia, maybe isn't their sweet spot to run. So we'll probably, by the end of this financial year, Australian financial year, end of June next year, be running 4 hospitals for other parties under the Aspen Medical brand, on top of the work that we're doing to build more hospitals up there as well. So really exciting, virtual health, AI-driven, day surgeries. I mean, we're bringing all of these lessons, and Indonesia is going to be able to leapfrog a lot of countries, even like Australia, that has got really large tertiary hospital infrastructure, of which there is a reducing demand as processes and procedures and surgical procedures develop really, really rapidly. And that's what we're going to be bringing to Indonesia.
Glenn, how do you come across an opportunity like that? Or more importantly, how do you convert an opportunity like that? Can you talk about some of the foundational aspects, the early stages of that opportunity coming to bear?
Yeah, look, we'd been going up there a lot. We had signed an MOU. We were ready to do work elsewhere in Indonesia in 2019. 2020 was going to be our step-off year for all of that. Of course, COVID hit, so everything stopped. Those relationships declined, people moved on. So when we went back in 2023, those opportunities didn't exist, but the market still existed. In actual fact, the market had increased. The growing demographic, that middle class of Indonesia with a disposable income is really starting to grow, 28% and growing. The growth rate of Indonesia as a country is multiple times that of Australia. And so there is this urgent demand in the population, shorter lifespan than Australians, and they want that to be extended. So we continued to look around. We knew of other providers being up there. We teamed up with Dr. Andrew Rochford. We've bought into Doctor up there, which is now part of Aspen Medical Indonesia, and we're continuing to grow that opportunity. We continue to look for joint venture partners. We are part of a public-private partnership in Samarinda with Plenary, where we're now shortlisted, taking that project forward, adding to Aspen Medical's PPP history that we've got globally. So how do we find them? You just keep going up a lot and you just keep talking to people. And you've got to filter out all the opportunities. Not every single opportunity is one you want to follow through with, but you need to get a lot of lines in the water and see what bites, and then work out which one you want to pursue. And then just once you've got it, like we have with Depok, which is our first hospital, or Samarinda, then you just work and work and work at it. Pick your milestones. And as my mother used to say, you can eat an elephant if you take small enough bites. And that's what we keep doing. Just keep biting away until we've got that whole opportunity.
Well, Mum's advice proving to prove its value. You'll be happy to know I was at a leadership forum only in the last few days, and it was we had a conversation, a session on Indonesia, and this was not a Asia-specific forum. This was one talking about Australia's, a range of challenges and opportunities for Australia more broadly, mostly domestic actually, and then we got on to Indonesia. And people were lamenting the unrealised potential against the backdrop of the strategic importance of Australia's relationship with Indonesia. And you'll be happy to know that I cited Aspen Medical as a case in point, along with what some of the Australian universities are doing with branch campuses there, and really highlighting that from the historic perspective of, what have we got to trade versus particularly moving into the services sector where there seem to be changing profiles and opportunities around that for Australian businesses accessing Indonesian consumers. Do you think we're at an inflection point around our economic relationship with Indonesia, or there's still a lot more work to be done? Where do you characterise how Australia's heading in terms of its relationship with Indonesia?
I think it's such a good question. I think the Australian government understands the importance of Indonesia across several spheres. They see the fact that they're a neighbour, they're a huge neighbour right near us, facing a lot of similar challenges. They see that geopolitically, Indonesia is important for us. And I think they see that Indonesia economically is important to us, and we have something to contribute to Indonesian economy as well and their growth. Indonesia's got a very clear target about where they want to be as one of the big economies over the next few years. They've got a clear target on that. And I think Australia's commitment to understanding that and giving us a roadmap through the Nicholas Moore report, the Invested, where Australia investments in Southeast Asia should be over, by 2040, is a fantastic report. And to say how many government reports can you say are a fantastic report, it's terrific, because I think it gives a clear roadmap. It outlines the areas that we should work in. It talks to the industries that Australia has got an advantage of, not just in Indonesia, but all of the ASEAN nations. So I think government gets how important it is to us. I don't think business does. I think there's some businesses that have been there. You look at Linfox, have been in Southeast Asia for a long period of time. I think there's a number of Australian businesses, particularly in the resource sector, that are in Indonesia and elsewhere. But I think, Australian businesses have a tendency to quite comfortably sit in a plane for 18 hours to the US or Europe because they understand the food and the culture and they get it off the telly, but are not prepared to invest in a 7-hour flight, and maybe 3 or 4 of them, to wrap their head around what Southeast Asia or particularly Indonesia looks like and what it can mean. I mean, the growth of that, as I mentioned before, that burgeoning middle class, upper middle class with a discretionary income, which is important to them, that's amazing. And to see Australian companies not there more is really surprising. I mean, I have a personal view. I think the services industry is one of the biggest contributors of the Australian economy and an amazing export for us. I mean, we export Australian compassion. That's what we do in healthcare, and we're really, really proud of that. you've touched on another export area already, which is education. I think the universities are doing a great job. I think we could do more. I think we need to do more aligning with our regulatory bodies around how do we get Australia's regulatory bodies in lockstep with our universities to ensure that we're getting the populations we need in immigration. You know, I think tying up our immigration debate around housing is problematic, because I think it denies us access to a growing educational pool of people that are right next door that could be providing an enormous service for us. So health and education, I think, are two clear exports for us. I think there's three others that some of them are touched on in Nicholas Moore's report. Financial systems. Now, we've got great financial systems, great regulation. You have a look during the global financial crisis, which shows my age, of 2008. Australia was one of the few countries in the world that did not have a bank go bust. US did, UK did, Europe did, none of Australia's banks did. Why? Because our regulatory environment was such that we had a strong, robust financial model that would go. We can export those into Indonesia, into Southeast Asia, into the Pacific. You know, Australia's come up with a great model for telecommunication with Digicel in the Pacific. Maybe one of the things we should be looking at is saying, do we need a Southeast Asian Pacific bank where we get the four big banks to all contribute? So rather than each of them deciding as CEOs come in and out, you know, is Bank A going to be in Indonesia? Is it going to be in the Pacific? Will they pull in and out? Let's just get a presence. Let's get a Bank of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, supported by all four banks, supported by the Australian government, to help drive Australian businesses to go into those Southeast Asian countries and for them to invest in Australia. So I think financial systems, I think our digital and cyber work is right up there, and we could do a lot more around digitisation and cyber into Southeast Asia and the Pacific. I mean, we are falling behind. I see it in Indonesia and in China around digitisation. We need to do more, and we can export that. And the final one that I don't think gets anywhere near enough credit is our understanding of agriculture. We know how to grow in a difficult environment. We know how to adapt as climate change is coming around. So I think we could work really closely across Southeast Asia and the Pacific around how do we improve their agriculture? Because if we can help lift their populations, all those boats rise. Because if you help lift people and help grow their economy because they're growing more in agriculture, they're selling more product, their GDP is rising, now they want to buy more products, now they want better healthcare, now they want better education for their kids, all boats rise on a common tide. So health, education, financial systems, digital enablement, and agricultural productivity. So I'm not talking about selling lobsters or wheat from Australia. I'm talking about selling the know-how CSIRO, farmers and do. We did those 5 areas. We touch every area of their economy. And that's when we start to intermesh our economies really well. And our economy grows, their economy grows, their GDP grows, their individual GDP grows, which means they want more. And it's an amazing self-sustaining growth. I mean, I think we've already started with health and education, but I think if we could target those areas that are in the 2040 report, that next 20 years of growth for us will be enormous as a country, and we'll set ourselves up for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren past that.
Glenn, I want to talk about and touch on what else it's going to take us to get there, to realise those opportunities. We often refer to the mindset shift that might be needed for people to act. You and I have spoken about how Australian businesses think about risk, how they manage risk, how they mitigate risk, how they view the risk and reward equation, because that's essentially what we're talking about here. We're not saying it's all just there for the taking. Businesses need to think through all the trade-offs or all the returns, the work that's going to be required, the hard work that's going to be required to achieve many of the outcomes you've spoken about. But, what do you think in terms of the mindset shift required and how Australian businesses should be thinking a little bit more internationally rather than domestically for growth?
I think if anything, if the last 18 months, 2 years has not convinced us that the geopolitics of the world are an unstable thing at the moment, then nothing will. What we've seen in Europe, what we've seen in the Middle East, what we've seen in America, the ability for things to change really, really quickly mean that we need to have, to use an Asian analogy, as many rice bowls as possible to eat out of.
Yep.
And I think we've been very, very lucky as a nation. We've had great trading relationships with Europe and with America. And so I think, quite honestly, as businesses, we've probably got a bit lazy. I said, this is great. I get good revenue. I know who I'm dealing with. I don't mind going over the States occasionally and going catching an NBL game. This must be terrific. This is all I need to do. But I think the change of the world, the rapidity of that change, suggests that you need more rice bowls to eat out of. And so you need to look around and go, well, and what gets me is if there's nothing we learned out of COVID, it's we need more rice bowls to work with because we don't know who's going to shut down a border, who's going to do this or that or the other. And we have so many people, 600 million people living within a 6 to 8 hour flight away. Why would we not make them a market? And so talking about who lives in Indonesia, what market's there, what is forming in the Philippines, what's in Laos, looking across all of Southeast Asia makes so much sense rather than going, I'll continue to sell to Texas. And I think people need to analyse risk and realise that geopolitical risk now plays into all of our businesses. I can't think of one business that shouldn't have geopolitical risk in its risk matrix that it's assessing. And so, therefore, you should be looking at countries that are perhaps closer, that have expressed a desire to work with us, that respect us, that are interested in being our partners, and say to them, all right, let's go and work out. That doesn't mean that you're going to open an office in every ASEAN nation by Friday, but you should be doing the desktop analysis of all of them, working out which ones are your first, second, and third priorities, and going and visiting them. Talk to other Australian companies who are there. Talk to Austrade, talk to AsiaLink, talk to even other companies that might be from other companies from different countries that are operating there. I found people so helpful when we travel around the world. And so subsequently drawing on that knowledge base, but sitting back and thinking that the world in 2028 will look the same that it looked in 2008, I think is irresponsible. And so subsequently, you need to work out how to mitigate risk. It doesn't mean being risky. It means look at genuinely what are other markets you could go to, what are the risks, and then how you mitigate them. And a lot of people just, I think, look at risks and then go, I can't go there, right? Rather than going, oh, that's a risk, how would I mitigate it? And then mitigate it and see what that does to your risk analysis after that. And I think we've been able to do that very, very well in Indonesia, and we're growing now into the Philippines, Cambodia, and elsewhere. And I think these are great growth markets for us, and will continue to be.
I think that's really powerful advice, Glenn. Yeah, and you may well have anticipated my final question for our conversation, which is if you encountered a business leader, an Australian business leader, and they said, rightio, you've convinced me, I'm going to look within our region. I see these large, populous growing markets. I've heard the latest insights about the growing affluence and therefore the ability to afford our premium goods and services or what we have to offer. What advice would you give that business leader before they hop on a plane and turn up?
On top of what I've just said, I'd say you better involve your whatever your senior leadership is in your business. So if you've got a board, involve the board. Why is that critical? Boards are typically older people, right? They've retired from business, they've built their own business, they've got amazing experience, great capability, and they're older. And so they may not be familiar with Southeast Asia. They may not be familiar with the fact that Indonesia holds a democratic election in one single day. You know, 268 million people on a single day vote and have an election, of which, to be honest, no one was sitting there saying, I guarantee it'll be this, that, or the other. We all waited to see the result. Right? So they do amazing things. They may not be familiar. So start with your senior exec. If it's a board, brief your board. Tell them, I think there's a strategy we should be looking at. There's great work. Here's the 2040 report. Here's what it means. There's some brilliant work done by them on the page, 2040 report on a page. Get your board across them. Get them excited. Draw on their experiences and find out what their risks are in their head. What are their concerns so you address them. If it's your own company, you don't have a board and you've got your exec, you're going to need to do the same thing so that they don't go, oh, well, the boss is off chasing some fairy tale, but we're going to stick to what we're doing. Get them excited about it as well. Then do really hard research and put it out to be challenged. Ask people, right, this is where I think we've looked at all these countries. I think we're going to go to this one here. We're going to go visit here. We've spoken to these people. What have I missed? What risks haven't I seen? What am I not doing? So you bring them along on your journey with you and look at, after every trip, write your analysis. What have I done? What have I learned? What do we need to do differently? And is this going to work for us? Use hard data about it, but take an opportunity to look at it and go, I think I might have just found something that no one else has bothered to because they're too busy trying to get to LA or Paris without realizing what is literally a 7-hour flight away.
Glenn, that's been a compelling conversation as always. Thank you so much for joining us on The Giants Next Door.
Lee, it's been an honour. Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in to The Giants Next Door. If this conversation sparked something in you, be sure to follow the show and share it with others who are thinking seriously about Australia's future in Asia. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.